And joining us, our political panel, the Washington Examiner, Susan Ferriccio, the Weekly Standard's John McCormick, and the National Journal's Ron Fournier. Ron, first to you, your thoughts as this now this budget goes from the Pentagon over to Capitol Hill. What kind of receptions is it going to get?
Well, first, following Colonel North is like following Babe Ruth. This is, I feel, kind of in a bad position here. I think the number
here. You probably agree with that.
Look, I can understand why he's upset. I can understand why many Americans are upset by these cuts. I think the number we have to realize, though, is $17 trillion. We have an enormous debt in this country. And I'll say to liberals who don't want to give up education and spending on domestic policies, and I'll say to conservatives who for good reasons don't like to look at these cuts, how else are we going to deal with the budget problems that we have if we don't do the big things right, which is starting with having new revenue on one side and cutting entitlements on the other side, because there's no other way we're going to be. This is only going to get worse. The budget we're seeing here is just a drop in the bucket of the kind of cuts we're going to have both at the Pentagon and on the domestic level, unless we really get our house in order domestically.
John.
Well, these are the kind of cuts you have to make when you're not willing to rein in entitlements, which are our biggest driver of our debt. President Obama, this was the one cut he agreed to, and Republicans said the only thing worse than defense cuts are no cuts at all. I actually think that's foolish, because you really can't balance the budget on the backs of the military. And what happens 10 years from now, after we've hollowed out the military, when we have, the entitlements are growing even more, baby boomers are retiring at a huge rate, Medicare is expanding. I think this is definitely making us more, it's making us less safe. It's still a dangerous world, and we just don't know what's next. We can predict one thing, but we don't know what the next war is going to be.
And I don't disagree with that. I'm saying we have to do both.
Well, Susan, let me ask you this, though. I mean, every time I read stories about Capitol Hill, I see about these incredible cost overruns with these big defense contractors. Right. I mean, I realize that we have to cut spending, but it's really within the military. How are we really cutting if we're allowing these enormous cost overruns for things that we may not need or don't need? I mean, there's also smart cutting and dumb cutting.
Well, lawmakers always talk about curbing the waste, fraud, and abuse in the military and how much money that can save. But I also agree with what Colonel North was saying, that there are Republicans that would go along with this who years ago would not. With the idea of shrinking the military and making cuts the size of what we heard Secretary Hagel talk about today. But let's talk about where this is really going to go in Congress. I really doubt that you will see the kind of reductions they're talking about today unless there is some give on the other side on the entitlements. I think Republicans may try to seize the opportunity with this number that was put forward today to say, look, if you want this kind of reduction, because don't forget, Congress really needs to give approval to a lot of these deductions that they're talking about. If they're going to say, if you want us to go forward with these reductions, we need to see something real on cuts to Medicare and Social Security to curb the growth of those entitlement programs. So far, President Obama has signaled he's not willing to do that in his upcoming budget. This, I think, will reopen that conversation, because even though there are some Republicans who are amenable to making these changes in the military, many others are not, and they will be the driving force behind this.
That would be one heck of a grand bargain if we could get Republicans to realize that the Pentagon does need to be cut, that we're not fighting these two protracted wars anymore, that technology makes warfare cheaper, and we can convince liberal Democrats that we don't need all these entitlements. It'd be nice if we had them, but we can't afford them. We have to reform the entitlements now, or we're going to be killed by them 10, 15 years down the road. That would be a heck of a bargain.